Hi, I'm Assaf Weksler, Ben-Gurion University of the Negev and the Open University of Israel. And this is a brief introduction to my paper, Retinal Images and Object Files. The paper concerns the perspectivality of vision, perspectival properties. So to see what I talk about, look at this plate. The plate is round, but from my perspective and your perspective, it looks elliptical. But the plate itself, of course, is not elliptical. So what are we experiencing? That is a sort of a phenomenological question. How can we account for the elliptical phenomenology of the experience? One option is that we experience an inner elliptical thing, say a retinal image, something going on in the retina or a pattern of light with an elliptical shape hitting the retina. I call this option ret. The second option is that what we experience is a property of the plate itself, a relational property of the plate. The plate has the property of having an elliptical projection, or projection in an elliptical pattern of light. It's a property of the plate. So I call this view the relational properties view. Right? So on the first view, what we experience is an inner ellipse of some sort. On RPV, what we experience is an external property, a property of an external object, the property of having an elliptical projection in relation to here. The ellipticality of the plate is a special case of the more general category of perspectival properties. And correspondingly, we can describe RET and RPV in more general terms as follows. RET is the view that perspectival properties are intrinsic properties of the retina or something in the vicinity, and RPV is the view that perspectival properties are relational properties of external objects. So how do philosophers decide which view is correct on this issue? And what we find in the literature is a lot of phenomenological discussion, epistemological and metaphysical. Let me just illustrate the phenomenological consideration, which is pretty straightforward. It simply says, simply look at the plate. Here is the plate. Just look at it and see that when you look at it, you see that the plate itself looks elliptical. It doesn't look as if there is something internal in our eyes, inside us in some other sense, that looks elliptical. It seems as though the plate itself looks elliptical. This is supposed to be a phenomenological datum. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some philosophers deny this particular issue and say that introspection is silent on this matter, or even the opposite possibility, that it favors RET. My purpose in this talk is to suggest an alternative way to test whether RPV or RET are correct. And the idea is to appeal to psychology, is to find an experimental method or means to assess whether RPV or RET are correct, a way that bypasses introspection and avoids this problematic issue of disagreements about introspection and focuses instead on an objective measure from psychology. Okay, so my suggestion is to use the object file framework developed by Kahneman, Treisman, and Gibbs to test whether RPV or RET are correct. The basic idea of the object file framework is that the visual system tracks objects that we see and places information about them in corresponding object files. So now we can formulate the following argument. If object files contain information about perspectival properties, I call this premise PAF, and if object files track or are of external objects, I call this premise EXT, then the visual system attributes perspectival properties to external objects. And if this is so, if the visual system attributes perspectival properties to external objects, this is consistent with RPV, but not with RET, because RPV says that perspectival properties are properties of external things, and RET denies this, saying that they are properties of internal things. So this is basically, so this now looks like an argument in favor of RPV and against RET that relies on the claim that object files contain information about perspectival properties. And the nice thing about this is that there is an experimental paradigm for testing whether a given feature is stored in object files. So in order to test whether perspectival properties are stored in object files, all we need to do is to apply this paradigm to the case of perspectival properties. The experimental paradigm is a bit complex, and I won't describe it in this presentation. You can find it in the paper, but it's basically it's to look for an object-specific priming effect or an object benefit effect. Very roughly, the idea is that on certain conditions, features that are stored in object files are recognized faster. So in order to test whether RPV is correct, what we need to do is to apply this paradigm to perspectival properties, create the relevant conditions, and ask and see whether perspectival properties are indeed recognized faster. And if they are recognized faster, this shows that perspectival properties are stored in object files. So this will sum up the argument, so let me sum it up in a slide. We can empirically test whether perspectival properties are stored in object files. If they are, this is what PIF says, and if object files are of external objects, or these specific object files are of external objects, then the visual system attributes perspectival properties to external objects. If the visual system attributes perspectival properties to external objects, then RET is false and RPV is true. Conclusion: RPV and RET. RPV is empirically testable via the object files framework, which is all I wanted to show. Thank you very much for listening, and please read the paper if you're interested. Thank you.